In the last episode, Femi and Ada faced intense scrutiny from their community after leaving their daughter, Amara, alone. The judgment only deepened their guilt, pushing their marriage to the brink. When they returned home after a tense community meeting, an anonymous letter was found on their doorstep. The note warned, "Your family's secrets aren't safe. Be careful who you trust." The ominous message left Femi and Ada standing in the doorway, their anxiety intensifying as they exchanged worried looks. The letter lay on the kitchen table, its stark warning glaring up at them. Femi paced the small space, his brow furrowed as Ada sat stiffly, her eyes not moving from the paper. "Do you think someone's trying to scare us?" Ada asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Femi stopped pacing and looked at her, the tension in his body visible. "Or maybe someone knows something," he said. "Something I've kept buried." Ada's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What haven't you told me, Femi?" He sighed, running a hand over his face. "It's complicated. Years ago, I had business dealings that went sour. But I never thought anyone would come after us like this." Ada pushed her chair back abruptly, the screech echoing in the quiet kitchen. "And you didn't think to tell me this before? You kept this from me? Even with everything that's happened." "I thought it was over, Ada. I didn't think it would ever come back," Femi said, his tone defensive but tinged with regret. A sharp knock on the door broke the tension, making them both jump. Ada exchanged a look with Femi before getting up. She opened the door to see Mama Nena standing there, concern etched into her features. "I came to check on Amara," she said. "And I heard there's talk going around again." Ada's face hardened, but she nodded and stepped aside to let Mama Nena in. "Amara's in her room," Ada said. "But there's something we need to show you first." Mama Nena's eyes flickered with worry as she saw the letter on the table. She picked it up, her expression tightening as she read. "This isn't good," she muttered, looking up at Femi. "You need to find out who sent this." "We will," Femi said, "but we have no idea where to start." Mama Nena placed a reassuring hand on Ada's shoulder. "The community may talk, but not everyone is against you. We'll find out what we can." The next day, Detective Ifani, a tall, stern-looking man with keen eyes, visited their house. He'd heard about the break-in and the letter from a friend at the precinct. He walked in with an air of authority, his eyes scanning the room as he took in the tense faces of Femi and Ada. "So, you received a threat?" Ifani asked, glancing at the note on the table. Femi nodded. "It was left on our doorstep 2 nights ago. We've had other incidents, too. Someone broke into the house recently." Detective Ifani's brow lifted. "And why wasn't this reported immediately?" Femi shifted uneasily. "We thought it might be kids or just some random act. We didn't realize it could be connected." "Connected to what, Mr. Femi?" Ifani's eyes were sharp, catching the slight hesitation in Femi's response. "There were some business issues I had years back. Disagreements that didn't end well," Femi admitted. Ada crossed her arms tightly. "Which he never told me about," she added, her tone biting. Ifani looked between them, then nodded once. "We'll need more details, but for now, stay alert. If you receive another threat or notice anything strange, call me immediately." He handed Femi a card with his contact information. "We'll do our best to get to the bottom of this." That night, Ada lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but her mind buzzed with questions and fears. Femi turned to face her, the silence between them thick. "Ada, I know I should have told you everything before," Femi said softly. "But I need you to trust me now." Ada's eyes flicked to his, her gaze hard. "Trust isn't something you just ask for, Femi. You earn it, and right now, I don't know if you have." The tension hung between them until a noise outside broke it. A metallic clang followed by footsteps. Femi sat up quickly, his ears straining. "Did you hear that?" Ada nodded, her heart racing. "Check on Amara," she whispered. Femi slipped out of bed and moved down the hall to Amara's room. She was asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He felt a brief moment of relief before another noise, closer this time, snapped him to attention. Ada, call Ifani, he said, his voice low but urgent. Before Ada could reach for her phone, the living room window shattered, glass spraying across the floor. Ada gasped, stepping back as Femi rushed to block the hallway. A dark figure appeared through the broken window, their silhouette menacing. "Stay back!" Femi shouted, his voice shaking but strong. The intruder paused, then retreated suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps echoing as they fled. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ragged breathing of Femi and Ada. Moments later, Ifani's voice crackled through the phone. "We're on our way," he said. "Don't touch anything until we get there." Detective Ifani and a team of officers arrived within minutes, securing the area and inspecting the damage. Ifani pulled Femi aside as the officers collected evidence. "Any idea who would want to scare you like this?" Ifani asked, his tone probing. Femi clenched his jaw. "It could be someone connected to Jude," he admitted. "We had a falling out years ago. He lost a lot because of a deal that went south." Ifani's eyes narrowed. "Jude Okoro?" Femi nodded, a shiver running down his spine at the name. "Yes, he always blamed me for what happened, but I thought he'd moved on." Ifani's face darkened. "Jude's not the type to forgive or forget. If he's involved, you and your family are in real danger." Ada, overhearing the conversation, felt her knees go weak. "What does this mean, Femi?" she asked, fear threading through her voice. "It means we need to be ready," Ifani said firmly. "This isn't just about a grudge. Jude has resources, people who will do his bidding. We'll post surveillance around your house. But you need to stay vigilant." The next day, Amara sat at the kitchen table, drawing with colored pencils. She looked up at her parents, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. "Mama, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Ada walked over, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. We're just making sure we're safe." Amara nodded, but her eyes remained troubled. "Can Mama Nena come over today?" Ada glanced at Femi, who nodded. "Of course," Ada said. "She'll be here soon." As evening fell, Mama Nena arrived, bringing a sense of calm to the house. She sat with Amara, telling stories and keeping her distracted while Femi and Ada spoke in hushed tones in the kitchen. "We need to talk to Chaik," Femi said. "If Jude's involved, Chaik might know something." Ada crossed her arms. "You really think Chaik will help after all these years? He's always held a grudge against you." "Femi, we don't have a choice," Femi said, determination hardening his voice. "If he has any information, we need it." The next morning, Femi and Ada drove to Chaik's house, a modest place on the edge of town. Chaik answered the door with a wary expression, his eyes narrowing when he saw Femi. "What do you want?" Chaik asked, his tone clipped. "We need to talk." "It's about Jude," Femi said. Chaik's eyes widened, and for a moment, fear flickered across his face before he masked it with a scowl. "You brought this on yourself, Femi. You always were too proud to admit when you were in over your head." "I know," Femi said, his voice low, "but my family's being threatened now. If you know anything, please tell us." Chaik hesitated, glancing at Ada, who stood beside Femi with pleading eyes. He sighed and opened the door wider. "Come in. There are things you need to know." Chaik's house was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tightly to keep out the afternoon sun. The air inside felt heavy, thick with years of unspoken words and old grudges. Femi shifted uncomfortably on the worn-out couch, while Ada sat beside him, her eyes flicking between her husband and his estranged brother. Chaik leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The resemblance between the brothers was evident. Both shared the same sharp eyes and tense jawline. But where Femi's features were softened by worry, Chaik's were hardened by resentment. "Jude isn't someone you just walk away from," Chaik said after a long silence. "You should have known better, Femi." Ada, her patience wearing thin, interjected. "We're not here to point fingers. Our daughter is in danger, Chaik. If you know something, anything, tell us now." Chaik's eyes met Ada's, and for a brief moment, the coldness in his expression faltered. He pushed himself off the wall and walked over to a small table, opening a drawer and pulling out a faded photograph. He handed it to Femi. "That's Jude and his old crew," Chaik said. Before everything fell apart, Femi stared at the photograph, a younger version of himself standing beside Jude, both smiling at the camera with forced camaraderie. He felt a chill run down his spine as memories surfaced. Deals made in shadowed corners, whispered promises, and the eventual fallout when trust eroded like sand under the tide. Ada peered over his shoulder. "Is this the crew you dealt with before?" she asked. Femi nodded slowly. Yes, Jude was the leader and these others. They were loyal to him. Too loyal. Chaik sat down opposite them. "After things went south, Jude blamed you for everything. You left the mess behind and moved on. But those men," he gestured to the photo, "they stayed loyal. They kept him afloat, even when he lost almost everything." Ada's voice was tight. "And now he's back to take revenge?" "It's worse than that," Chaik said. "Jude doesn't just want to hurt you, Femi. He wants to ruin you. Everything you love. Everyone you care about." Femi's throat tightened. "So what do we do? How do we protect Amara?" Chaik's eyes darkened. "There's only one way. You confront him before he gets the chance to come for you. But you need to be ready. This isn't a man who forgives." Later that evening, Femi and Ada returned home, their conversation with Chaik replaying in their minds. The house felt more like a fortress than a home now, with the windows locked and a feeling of constant vigilance hanging in the air. Amara was in her room, drawing at her desk when Ada walked in. "Mama, do you want to see my drawing?" she asked, holding up a sketch of a big house surrounded by flowers. It was bright and hopeful, contrasting sharply with the tension suffocating the family. Ada forced a smile, kneeling next to Amara. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Maybe one day we'll plant a garden like this." Amara's face brightened for a moment before her smile faltered. "Are we safe, Mama? I heard noises last night." Ada's heart clenched. She reached out and smoothed Amara's hair. "We're safe. Daddy and I are making sure of that." Amara nodded, though her eyes still held a shadow of worry. She turned back to her drawing, the moment of innocence slipping away as Ada stood and left the room, her composure cracking once she was out of sight. The following morning, Femi decided it was time to confront Jude. The stakes were too high to sit and wait. Ada insisted on coming along, despite Femi's protests. "Don't argue with me," she said, her voice resolute. "This is our family. We face it together." They drove in tense silence to the address Chaik had provided, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Femi parked the car a distance away, and they approached on foot, the crunch of gravel under their shoes sounding louder than it should in the quiet of the abandoned lot. Ada glanced around, her nerves frayed. "Are you sure he'll be here?" she whispered. Before Femi could answer, a voice echoed from inside the warehouse. "You've come to visit, old friend. How brave." Jude stepped out of the shadows, his smile as sharp as a knife. Time had changed him. His once tidy appearance was now rougher, more dangerous. Behind him stood two men, faces obscured by caps and sunglasses. "Femi," Jude continued, spreading his arms wide. "It's been too long." Femi swallowed, feeling Ada's presence beside him like a lifeline. "We're not here to fight, Jude. We need to end this. Whatever you think I owe you, let's settle it." Jude's smile faded, his eyes hardening. "Settle it? You think this is just about money or broken deals? You took everything from me, Femi. While you moved on, I was left in the ashes. And now, I'm gonna show you what that feels like." Ada stepped forward, surprising Femi with the steel in her voice. "You don't need to hurt Amara. She's an innocent child. Whatever your grudge is, it's with Femi, not her." Jude's gaze flickered to Ada, then back to Femi. "See, that's where you're wrong. To make you suffer, I need to tear apart what you cherish most." One of Jude's men shifted, and Ada's eyes caught the glint of metal, a gun tucked in the man's waistband. She swallowed hard, keeping her fear in check. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice trembling despite her attempt to stay composed. Jude's eyes narrowed. "It's already done." Suddenly, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Jude's expression shifted from triumph to annoyance. "Seems you're smarter than I thought, Femi," he muttered. Before anyone could react, Jude signaled his men, and they backed away into the deeper shadows of the warehouse. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and menacing. With a final glare, they disappeared through a side exit. Femi exhaled shakily as Detective Ifani burst into the warehouse, gun drawn, followed by a team of officers. "Are you both okay?" Ifani asked, scanning the room for signs of the men. "We're fine," Femi said, his voice still trembling. "But Jude got away." Ifani nodded, frustration clear in his eyes. "We'll find him, but this just confirms that your family is in more danger than we thought." Back at home, Amara sat on the porch with Mama Nena, who had come to stay with her while Femi and Ada were out. When the car pulled up, Amara's face lit up with relief. "Mama, Papa," she called, running to meet them. Ada bent down and hugged her tightly, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her. "We're here, baby. We're okay." Mama Nena's eyes met Ada's, a silent question passing between them. Ada nodded subtly, confirming that the day's encounter had been serious. That night, as they prepared for bed, Ada sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the floor. "Jude won't stop, Femi. He won't rest until he's destroyed us." Femi sat beside her, the lines on his face deeper than ever. "We'll protect Amara. We'll protect each other. But we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Ada reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "We will." Together, in the darkness of their room, they both knew that this was only the beginning. Jude's shadow loomed over them, a constant reminder that the past never stayed buried for long. But they also knew that as long as they stood together, they had a chance. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faintest echo of danger with it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the kitchen as Femi sat at the table, staring at his phone with tired eyes. His mind replayed the events at the warehouse. Jude's smirk, the menacing promise, and the distant wail of sirens that had cut their confrontation short. Across from him, Ada poured herself a cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly. "Did Ifani call back?" Ada asked, breaking the silence. Femi shook his head. "Not yet. He said they were looking into possible leads, but Jude's careful. He won't make it easy." Ada sat down, placing her hand on his. "We need to be prepared, Femi. This isn't over, and if Jude wants to hurt us, he'll come back soon." Femi clenched his jaw, looking out the window where Amara played in the yard with Mama Nena. The sight of his daughter laughing, oblivious to the danger around them, made his resolve harden. "I won't let him touch our family." Detective Ifani arrived later that morning, his expression serious. He removed his cap and ran a hand over his close-cropped hair. "We searched the warehouse, but they cleared out before we could get there. It's like they knew we were coming." Ada's eyes narrowed. They did know. Jude must have someone on the inside. It's the only way he could have escaped so fast. Ifani's eyes met hers, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "We're looking into that possibility. But Femi, we need to know more about Jude's operations. The deeper we dig, the more dangerous this gets." Femi leaned back, the weight of the request pressing down on him. "I cut ties with that world years ago, Ifani. I don't know who's loyal to him now or what he's involved in. But you know someone who might," Ifani said pointedly. "Your brother, Chaik." Ada's stomach dropped at the mention of Chaik. Their last conversation had been tense, and she doubted he'd be willing to help again. But they were running out of options. Femi nodded slowly. "I'll talk to him." The air was thick with tension as Femi and Ada stood on Chaik's porch later that day. Chaik opened the door, his face shadowed by skepticism. "Back so soon?" "We need more information," Femi said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Jude's planning something bigger, and you know how he thinks." Chaik's eyes narrowed. "I told you everything I know. What more do you want from me?" Ada stepped forward, her voice steady but urgent. "Chaik, this isn't just about Femi. It's about Amara. She's in danger. You have a niece who could be hurt if we don't stop Jude." Chaik's jaw tightened, and for a moment, The hardness in his eyes softened. He looked at Ada, then at Femi, before exhaling sharply. There's one person who might know Jude's movements, Tund, an old associate. But he's unpredictable, and he won't talk easily. Where can we find him? Femi asked. Chike hesitated, glancing between them. He runs a mechanics shop downtown. Be careful. Tund's not someone who likes surprises. The mechanics shop was a maze of broken cars and greasy tools. The air smelled of oil and sweat, and the constant clanking of metal against metal filled the space. Femi and Ada walked in, their eyes scanning for any sign of Tund. A man with muscular arms and a face hardened by years of street life emerged from under a car hood. He wiped his hands on a rag, squinting at the newcomers. This isn't a place for window shopping. What do you want? Femi stepped forward. We need to talk, Tund. Recognition flashed in Tund's eyes, followed by a smirk. Well, look who decided to crawl out of the past. Femi, I thought you were done with us. I am, Femi said firmly. But this is different. It's about Jude. We know he's planning something, and we need to know where he's hiding. Tund chuckled, the sound sharp and cold. Jude doesn't stay in one place long, and even if I knew, why would I tell you? He's got people everywhere. Talking would be a death sentence. Ada stepped forward, determination flaring in her eyes. We're not asking for favors, Tund. We're asking because an innocent child's life is at stake. You don't owe us, but you don't owe Jude either. Tund's smirk faltered, his eyes shifting as he weighed her words. You're brave. I'll give you that, he muttered. He sighed, glancing around before leaning in closer. I don't know where he is now, but last I heard, he was moving between an old factory near the river and a warehouse near the train tracks. If you're going after him, you'd better watch your backs. Femi nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me, Tund said, turning back to his work. And don't come here again. Back at home, Ada and Femi sat in the living room, processing what they had learned. Ada glanced at the clock, then out the window where the sun was starting to dip below the horizon. We should tell Afani. He needs to know about these locations. Femi nodded but paused as a knock at the door startled them both. Ada exchanged a glance with him, and he motioned for her to stay put as he approached the door. It was Mama Nena, her eyes wide with worry. I came as soon as I heard, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Heard what? Ada asked, her pulse quickening. There was an incident at the school today, Mama Nena said, glancing at Amara, who sat nearby, playing with her toys. One of the teachers saw a man watching the children from the fence. By the time they called security, he was gone. Ada's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Did they see who it was? Did they describe him? Mama Nena shook her head. No, but they said he was wearing a cap, and he drove off in a dark car. Femi's face darkened, the pieces clicking into place. Jude's sending a message, he muttered. Amara looked up, sensing the tension in the room. Mama, is everything okay? She asked, her eyes wide with confusion. Ada walked over and knelt by her daughter. Everything's fine, my love. We're just being careful, that's all. Amara nodded slowly, but the worry in her eyes didn't fade. That night, Femi and Ada lay in bed, neither able to sleep. The house felt too quiet, every creak and rustle outside sounding like a potential threat. Ada turned to Femi, her voice a whisper. We can't keep living like this, waiting for Jude to make his move. We need to end this. Femi reached out and took her hand. We will, but we need to be smart. Afani will raid those locations, and we'll find Jude. Suddenly, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house, followed by Amara's scream. Femi bolted upright, adrenaline surging through him. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the bed and ran into the hallway, Ada close behind him. In the living room, a brick lay on the floor surrounded by shards of broken glass. A piece of paper was tied to it, fluttering slightly in the breeze from the shattered window. Femi picked it up, his hands trembling as he read the hastily scrawled message. You're running out of time. Leave or next time it'll be worse. Ada's eyes filled with fear as she hugged Amara tightly. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. "Now?" Femi nodded, his mind racing. "We'll go to Chike's for the night. It's the only place Jude won't expect." As the family packed quickly, Detective Afani arrived, his face set in grim determination. He took in the broken window and the note in Femi's hand, nodding tightly. "Good call. I'll have officers posted here, but you're safer moving for now." Femi locked eyes with Afani. "Find him, detective, before he finds us." Afani's expression softened, a rare moment of vulnerability. "We will. You have my word." With Amara bundled safely in the back seat and Mama Nena in the passenger seat, Femi and Ada drove through the dark streets, the weight of fear and determination pressing down on them. They knew this was only the beginning, and the true test was yet to come. The night was cloaked in an uneasy silence as Femi drove through the dimly lit streets toward Chike's house. Ada sat in the passenger seat, glancing back every few seconds to check on Amara, who clutched Mama Nena's hand tightly. The weight of the note tied to the brick pressed heavily on their minds, each bump in the road feeling like a drumbeat of urgency. "We're almost there," Femi said, his voice tight. He caught Ada's eye, seeing the worry mirrored in her expression. "We need to be careful, Femi," Ada said, her tone laced with fear. "Jude's going to escalate this. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." "I know," Femi replied, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "But we'll be ready for him." Chike opened the door as soon as they pulled up, his eyes sharp with a mix of suspicion and concern. "Get inside, quickly," he said, glancing nervously up and down the street. Once they were inside, Chike locked the door and drew the heavy curtains closed. The small living room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. Amara huddled next to Mama Nena on the couch, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. "Is this where we're staying now, Mama?" she asked, her voice soft. Ada knelt down in front of her, brushing a strand of hair away from her daughter's face. "Just for tonight, sweetheart. We're staying with Uncle Chike to keep safe." Chike cleared his throat, drawing Femi's attention. "Tell me what happened," he said, his tone gruff. Femi handed him the crumpled note, and Chike read it with a scowl. "He's sending a message," Chike muttered. "He's letting you know he's not done." "We know that," Ada said, her frustration evident. "The question is, what do we do now? We can't keep running and hiding." Chike's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "You won't have to," he said finally. "There's a way to draw Jude out, but it's risky." Femi raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" Chike glanced at Amara, then at Mama Nena, who gave him a small nod before leading Amara to the kitchen to distract her. Once they were out of earshot, Chike leaned in closer. "Jude has a safe house near the old train tracks. It's where he plans his moves. If you can force him to come to you, you might have a chance to confront him on your terms." "Force him how?" Ada asked, her eyes narrowing. "Set a trap," Chike said. "Leak false information that you'll be at a certain location, unprotected. He'll take the bait." Femi exchanged a look with Ada. "And what if he doesn't?" Chike's expression darkened. "Then you keep running, and hope he doesn't find you first." The plan was set in motion the next day. Detective Afani arranged for controlled leaks of information that suggested Femi would be meeting a contact at an old community center, isolated and away from any public view. Officers would be stationed discreetly nearby, ready to intervene if Jude appeared. "Are you sure about this?" Afani asked as they walked through the abandoned building, checking sightlines and exit points. The air inside was thick with dust, each step kicking up tiny clouds that sparkled in the sunlight filtering through broken windows. "It's our only chance," Femi said, his eyes scanning the room. "We can't keep living like this." Ada stood by the entrance, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "If anything goes wrong, we could be putting Amara in even more danger," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll be ready," Afani reassured them. "The moment Jude shows himself, we'll move in." As night fell, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Femi sat alone on a worn-out chair at the center of the room, his heart thudding loudly in his chest. Ada and Chike waited in a nearby surveillance van with Afani and his team, eyes glued to the monitors showing live feeds from hidden cameras around the building. "This feels wrong," Ada whispered, her hands clenching and unclenching in her lap. "It's the only way," Chaik said, though his tone was far from confident. Suddenly, the grainy footage on one of the monitors flickered. A dark figure moved in the shadows outside the building. Afani leaned forward, a tense expression crossing his face. "He's here." Inside, Femi heard the faint creak of footsteps, each one setting his nerves on edge. The room felt colder as Jude stepped out of the shadows, flanked by two men whose faces were partially obscured by hoods. "Brave of you to show up alone," Jude said, his smile cruel and mocking. "Did you think I'd fall for such an obvious trap?" Femi forced himself to stay calm, his eyes meeting Jude's. "This ends now, Jude. You've done enough." Jude laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Done enough? You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about money or revenge. It's about taking back what was stolen from me." "And what exactly was that?" Femi shot back, trying to buy time. "Everything," Jude snarled. "My reputation, my crew, my future. You walked away clean while I paid the price." Before Femi could respond, one of Jude's men moved forward, pulling a gun from his waistband. Femi's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay still. "Now, let's make this quick," Jude said, nodding at the man. Just as the man raised the gun, the sound of a door slamming open filled the room, followed by shouts of "Police!" Afani and his team stormed in, weapons drawn. "Drop your weapons!" Afani shouted, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. The room erupted into chaos. Jude's men hesitated for a split second before one of them lunged toward the exit. Gunshots cracked through the air as officers moved in, pinning the men to the ground. Jude, eyes wide with fury, tried to escape but was tackled by Afani himself. Femi exhaled, the tension in his body finally releasing as he slumped back into the chair. Ada rushed in moments later, eyes darting around until she found him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I'm fine," Femi said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's over." But Jude, pinned to the floor by two officers, spat out one last threat. "This isn't over, Femi. You'll never be free of this." Afani looked down at him, eyes cold. "We'll see about that." Hours later, back at Chaik's house, the tension in the air was finally beginning to lift. Amara was asleep on the couch, exhaustion finally overcoming her. Ada sat beside her, stroking her hair while Femi spoke quietly with Afani. "Jude's in custody, but he wasn't working alone," Afani said, his expression serious. "We found documents suggesting he's part of a network. This might be bigger than we thought." Femi's relief was short-lived. "So it's not over?" "No," Afani said, "but we've dealt a major blow tonight. We'll stay on it, but you need to stay alert." As Afani left, Chaik walked over, his eyes softer than Femi had seen in years. "You did well, brother," he said. "We'll face whatever comes next together." Femi nodded, the weight of gratitude heavy in his chest. "Thank you, Chaik, for everything." Ada looked up, her eyes meeting Femi's. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice steady. Femi sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Yes, we will." Together, as they sat in the quiet living room, surrounded by the warmth of family, the threat that had loomed over them felt a little less suffocating. But deep down, they all knew the fight wasn't truly over. Jude's words echoed in Femi's mind, a chilling reminder that shadows from the past had a way of clinging on. Outside, the first light of dawn began to seep into the sky, promising a new day. But whether it was a day of peace or more battles to come, only time would tell. The morning sun cast a pale glow over Chaik's house, illuminating the tension that still clung to the air. Femi sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Ada stood at the window, watching the empty street outside, her eyes darting back and forth as if expecting to see shadows moving. Mama Nena shuffled into the room, her face lined with worry. She glanced at Amara, who was sitting on the couch, absently coloring in a book. The little girl seemed to sense the unease but didn't ask questions. She had learned that silence often answered more than words. "Did you sleep at all?" Mama Nena asked, placing a gentle hand on Ada's shoulder. Ada shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear Jude's threats. I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting." "He's behind bars for now," Femi said, trying to sound reassuring but failing to mask the tremor in his voice. But Ifani said he wasn't acting alone. "This isn't over." Chaik entered the room, his eyes as sharp as ever. "Femi, we need to talk. I've been thinking about what Ifani said, that Jude is part of a larger network." Ada turned away from the window, crossing her arms. "And what do we do with that information? We barely managed to confront Jude without getting hurt. If this network is as powerful as Ifani suggests, how do we fight that?" Chaik's jaw clenched. "We don't wait for them to come to us. We need to find out who's pulling the strings." Femi set his mug down with a thud. "And how do we do that, Chaik? It's not like they're going to send us an invitation." Chaik's eyes glinted with an idea. "Tund. He might know more than he let on before. If he's connected to Jude's old crew, he might have heard things we can use." Ada glanced at Amara, her heart tightening with the weight of their conversation. She walked over to her daughter and knelt down, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "Mama needs to go out for a bit. Okay? You stay here with Mama Nena." Amara looked up, her eyes wide with the quiet understanding that only children possess. "Be safe, Mama." Ada smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Always, the mechanic's shop buzzed with the familiar sound of clanking metal and the low hum of conversation. Tund was bent over an engine, his muscular frame covered in grease. He didn't look up when Femi, Ada, and Chaik entered, but his posture stiffened. "I told you not to come back here," Tund said, wiping his hands on a rag before turning to face them. His eyes darted to Chaik, then back to Femi. "This better be important." "It is," Femi said, stepping forward. "Jude's been arrested, but we know he's not the end of this. We need names, Tund. Who else is involved?" Tund's eyes narrowed, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "You don't know what you're asking, Femi. The people tied to Jude aren't just street thugs, they have power, connections. Asking questions could get you killed." Ada stepped forward, her voice steady. "We're already in danger, Tund. If we're going to protect our family, we need to know who we're up against." Tund looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. He sighed and ran a hand over his head. "There's one name you need to know, Obiora. He's the one who funded Jude's rise, kept him afloat when everyone else turned their backs. If Jude's in jail, Obiora will want to tie up loose ends." "Where can we find him?" Chaik asked, his tone urgent. Tund shook his head. "You don't find Obiora. He finds you, but there's a place he frequents, an old club on the south side of town, under the radar but always busy. If he's in the city, that's where he'll be." Femi's chest tightened. "Thank you, Tund." "Don't thank me," Tund said, his eyes hardening. "And don't come back here. I don't want to be dragged into whatever storm you're chasing." The club was a far cry from the quiet streets Femi and Ada knew. Neon lights buzzed with a dim, blue glow, and the pounding music reverberated through the ground. The smell of smoke and spilled drinks clung to the air as they pushed their way inside. Chaik led them through the crowded room, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. They found a spot near the bar where they could observe without drawing attention. "Do you see him?" Ada whispered, leaning in so Chaik could hear. Chaik's eyes narrowed as he spotted a man at a corner table, flanked by 2 bodyguards. His suit was sharp, his demeanor colder than the ice in the drinks he sipped. "That's Obiora," Chaik said, nodding subtly. Femi's pulse quickened. "What's the plan?" "Wait," Chaik said. "Let him make the first move." Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like hours. Ada's eyes flicked nervously from Obiora to the door, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, Obiora's gaze shifted, landing squarely on them. A smirk played at his lips as he gestured for one of his guards to approach. "You 3, the guard said, pointing. "Mr. Obiora would like a word." Ada swallowed hard but nodded. They followed the guard to the corner table, every step making the air feel heavier. Femi, Chaik, and Ada, is it? Obiora said smoothly, his voice like velvet laced with steel. What an unexpected pleasure. We didn't come here for pleasantries. Obiora, Chaik said, his tone biting. We know you're behind Jude, and we know you're still out there tying up loose ends. It ends here. Obiora's smile widened, but his eyes were cold. Bold of you to think you can confront me and walk out unscathed. Femi's fists clenched at his sides. We're not here for a fight. We just want to be left alone. If you come near my family again, you'll regret it. Obiora leaned back, considering them with mild amusement. You think you can make demands of me? Jude was a pawn. A useful one, but replaceable. Your family's safety depends on one thing, your silence. Disappear, leave the city, and this ends. And if we don't? Ada challenged, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Obiora's smile vanished. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. Then you won't have a family left to protect. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the distant thump of music. Chaik's hand twitched, ready to act, but Femi placed a subtle hand on his arm, stopping him. We'll consider your offer, Femi said, forcing the words out. Obiora's smirk returned. Good. I knew you were reasonable. They turned and walked away, the weight of Obiora's threat pressing down on them with every step. As they exited the club, the cool night air felt sharp and unforgiving. Back at Chaik's house, the tension was palpable. Ada paced the living room, her mind racing. We can't just leave. We can't run. We won't, Femi said, his voice low but firm. But we need to be smart. If Obiora thinks we're backing down, it'll buy us time. Chaik nodded. And while he thinks we're disappearing, we gather what we need to expose him. If he's connected to powerful people, we'll need proof. Mama Nena, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. I have friends, old friends, who know how to dig up what others wish to keep buried. Let me reach out. Femi looked at her, a wave of gratitude washing over him. Thank you, Mama Nena. Ada sat down beside Amara, who had fallen asleep on the couch, her small hand curled into a fist. She stroked her daughter's hair, whispering, We'll keep you safe. No matter what, the days that followed were a blur of whispered phone calls and covert meetings. Mama Nena's friends proved resourceful, finding records that linked Obiora to various illegal dealings, including his support for Jude's criminal activities. Each piece of evidence was a small victory, but the looming threat of retaliation kept them on edge. One evening, while going through documents in the kitchen, Femi's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Meet me at the old pier. I have information. Come alone. Femi showed the message to Ada, who frowned. It could be a trap. It could also be our chance, Femi said. We need more if we're going to take down Obiora. I'm coming with you, Ada said firmly. No, Femi said, placing a hand on her arm. If something goes wrong, Amara needs you. Stay here with Chaik and Mama Nena. Ada's eyes filled with worry, but she nodded. Be careful. The old pier was bathed in moonlight, the water lapping quietly against the wooden posts. Femi stood alone, his breath visible in the cool night air. He glanced around, every shadow and movement setting his nerves on edge. A figure emerged from the darkness, and Femi's heart skipped a beat. It was Tund. What are you doing here? Femi asked, surprise lacing his voice. I heard things. Obiora's planning something big, and he's not happy with your little investigation, Tund said, his eyes darting around nervously. What does he know? Femi asked, stepping closer. Everything. You need to act fast or disappear, Tund warned. He has someone in the police on his payroll. Your friend Afani isn't as safe as you think. Before Femi could respond, the sharp crack of a gunshot split the air. Tund's eyes widened in shock as he stumbled, blood blossoming on his chest. He fell to the ground with a thud. Femi's blood turned to ice as he looked around, trying to locate the shooter. A car screeched in the distance, its taillights disappearing into the night. He dropped to his knees beside Tund, who struggled to breathe. They... No. Everything, Tund gasped before the light in his eyes faded. The echo of the gunshot lingered in Femi's mind as he stood, his body trembling. This was a message, a warning. Obiora wasn't playing games, and now, more than ever, Femi knew that if they didn't act quickly, their family would be next. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and you want a part 3 finale, comment part 3 in the comments and share the video with your friends and family. Also subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest episodes. Here is another interesting story to watch. Click to watch now.